Well, Vincent, thank you so much for helping me with my project. I was wondering if you could start off by saying a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Wait. Yes. Terrific. Well, happy to be here, Nathan. Thank you very much. My name is Vincent. I'm 24. I just graduated college in Massachusetts at Williams College, and mostly did history and political science and philosophy there. I'm now working at a software company in Washington, D.C., and I'm originally from Austria. And I'm really interested in space and came across the project that you're doing, so I thought I'd sign up.
I really appreciate that. I need to find a total of 1,840 people like you. I've got
Yeah.
1,600 more to go. So uh,
Well, that's great. I mean, how's that project been going for you?
it's been really good. You know, I've been working at home for the past 2 years,
Yeah.
and Doug Laverio was doing that whole countdown to the end of 2024 thing with like his
Yeah.
little lapel pin, and
Yeah.
he was
Yeah.
doing that hero of the day.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And I don't know, for some reason, like that was in the back of my head, and it was like Christmas vacation, and I was like, you know what I could do? I could go and interview a regular person every day for into
Yeah.
the end of
Yeah.
2024. And I told my niece about it. She was visiting me, and she's like, "Oh yes, Uncle Nathan, you should do that." And then here I am. So now it's kind of
Okay.
taken on a life of its own.
Yeah. Well, that's a really awesome project. I commend you for it.
But I'm kind of interested in. Uh, I mean, I see your background, so you're a big SpaceX fan.
Yeah, well, I'm not a space expert at all. And I know about SpaceX a little bit, but I'm not a super fan and I'm not an expert at all. But I do care about the topic. And I think what SpaceX has been doing over the last few years has really been tremendous and very promising. So I'm excited about, certainly what they're doing, but there's obviously a lot of potential beyond SpaceX as well, all of which is very exciting. But I've been having these Zoom backgrounds ever since I started this job, just to make it a little bit more interesting and to get some conversations with my teammates going, um, who might not know or care about space and space exploration on a daily basis. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's sort of. Uh, I mean, on the top of it, you have like the personal improvement project of actually getting out there and talking to people, but the secondary kind of thought is getting other people to think and talk about space too, because
Yeah.
each time you have a conversation, what have you. But um, like your teammates, um, do they have a similar background as you, or is it like very varied? And kind of what kind of reactions have you seen and interest? How has
Yeah. Yeah, so the company that I work for doesn't have anything to do with space. It's a software startup, but doesn't have anything to do with space. So there aren't really any teammates that I've met that take a personal interest in space. Um, but I've had very positive reactions just to having the Zoom background and people. I think and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, Nathan. But when the topic of space comes up. Certainly it's been my experience that people are quite excited about it, and you know uh, they are very open to the idea of space exploration, and they think it's a thrilling thing, even though they don't might not sort of engage with the topic regularly. um, but I felt that this is a great conversation starter, and that people are generally curious about it when they encounter the topic.
I mean, I've experienced a whole range, not the whole range, but a large range of
Yeah.
perspectives on the topic and
Yeah.
reactions. Um, a
Yeah.
lot of people, I mean, most of the people I've talked to are just like you, not like you, but like the people you describe in terms of it's not really like a core passion or something that they're paying attention to, but they're like, wow, that's cool. Um, but
Yeah.
I have talked to a lot of people who are like, why are we spending money on space when we could do these other things? That
Yeah.
common,
Yeah.
um, um, you know, what is it, opportunity cost kind of
Yeah.
discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think that, I think this is, you know, uh, certainly what I'm about to say is sort of an important thread in my thinking about this topic, which is that I perceive our cultural and political discourse as extremely, short-term focused. So obviously, like the topics that capture people's attention the most are the ones that are most immediate. And we, I think, do a generally pretty poor job of thinking long-term about how to make, humanity, better. Um, and obviously, that leads to topics like space exploration to be pretty low in people's priorities. And I really think that that's less a fault of people, themselves. I think it's really a product of a very short-term focused political and cultural discourse. Um, and uh, I'd love to change. I'd love for that to be different. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, if you think back, several hundred years ago, you had like these cathedrals that were built over generations.
Right.
One generation would lay the foundation, another one would like create the walls and the roofs, and now it seems like everything is, well, if you can't get it to me by tomorrow, what's the use?
Right.
And
Right. Right. Yeah.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
I totally agree with that. I mean, and I think the examples that you just used are apt. But there's also been different moments in American history where we did a good job planning for the future and undertaking projects that required a lot of people's attention over a long period of time. I mean, the first sort of wave of space exploration, of course, is the prime example, but there's others too. Um, and it's really about like bundling people's energies and and really crafting, I think, a compelling vision for the future in order to get people excited about it. A lot of people excited about it for a long time.
yeah. It's kind of interesting. If you build like a really tall building, you have to build a lot of supporting structures first before
Yeah.
you could build a building. Scaffolding,
Yeah.
ramps, supply chain and what have you. And
Yeah.
I saw something like on Twitter or Facebook or something the other day about this proposal to send a spacecraft out to like 100 AU.
Mhm.
The Voyagers only made it out to like 10 AU.
Yeah.
And they were talking about how it'd be like 50 years before it got to that point, if it'd be like a 50-year project. And it
Yeah.
was like, how do you create a project like this where the people that start it are like different than the people that are maintaining it
Yeah.
and will finally end it? and
Yeah.
and it kind of touched on the need to like create mentorship and apprentice programs and this whole kind of pipeline to kind of
Yeah.
maintain it over that long distance. And
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It needs institutional support. Um, and that can sort of like support multi-generational involvement for sure. You need a really robust institution to help with that, I think.
and it's kind of funny to think about NASA and how it's been with their human space flight. I think on their non-human space flight, they've done a lot better, but on their
Yeah.
human space flight, it's definitely feels like something that's constantly ping-ponging around between
Yeah.
various objectives.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. And also, I mean, with the budget that was just I think approved or a few weeks ago. Um, you probably know the details there, but I understand that the Artemis budget was like slightly cut again, which might delay the project or something like that. I don't know if you have the details on that.
Yeah, what I understand is they were looking for essentially like 1.5 billion or like 3 billion, something along that number, in addition to their normal to kind of
Yeah.
fund the human landing system. And the House version of that budget didn't have that. And it's going to be, November, December before the budget actually gets approved,
Uh-huh.
probably. So there's still hope that maybe through negotiations with the Senate, that you might see that
Yeah.
increased. But
Yeah. That would be great. Yeah.
um, but I mean, it's kind of, I mean, it's almost like we have the wrong organizational setup to be able to do goals over the long term of
Yeah.
what we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, I was touching on the political discourse a bit just a moment ago, but obviously there are huge sort of like structural obstacles in the American political system for a project of that magnitude to really occur. And we just um, it, the people in charge simply lack the incentives to undertake something like this, and it's really unfortunate. So you know, having said that, I think there is room for people with a compelling narrative. I mean, like people at SpaceX, that can actually make a really big impact. If sort of there's like if the institutional support on the government side isn't really there. So I mean, I think the narrative that Elon Musk has been crafting about Mars is very compelling, and I think it's got the potential to capture a lot more people still. So wondering, I just like, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but wondering like what the future of this sort of like of space exploration really looks like from a structural perspective. Um, and if you see any hope in the government actually galvanizing to get behind a very, very ambitious space exploration program or not, or whether private people are left to their own devices in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the government's role in terms of creating some foundational capabilities by essentially creating a marketplace for private investment and private services has been really productive. I mean, if you look at what's been done with like the commercial resupply to the International Space Station, you
Yeah,
have SpaceX and Cygnus able to deliver cargo, and now you have um, let's see, the Dream Chaser. Uh, I forgot who that's from. Okay, coming online, and then you
yeah,
have like the Commercial Crew Program, and now with like the lunar, uh, uh, Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program,
yeah,
with like these 15 companies competing to send
yeah.
two
Right, right.
spacecraft to the moon every year. I mean, it's really,
Awesome.
really
Yeah,
foundational and amazing. But I think ultimately, it's going to be private investment and private groups
yeah,
that will be able to spearhead things because, I mean, the government um, really is challenged with understanding the future. I mean, if you look at like
yeah,
the invention of the airplane, what I've read about the Wright brothers is that they took um, their developments to the government, and they're like, we don't know what we would do with this, you know.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah, no, I it's interesting. Yeah, and I think I think I agree with you. Th- and maybe this is a really promising model. Just to create a marketplace for these things to, um, be subject to private investment and private initiative. It's certainly promising at this point. Yeah.
But it's just really interesting looking at Jeff Bezos versus Elon Musk.
Mhm.
Elon definitely has a lot of impatience. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
he wants to see that city on Mars in
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. He wants to die there, but just not on impact.
Yes.
Yeah, which is hilarious. But I gotta say, I side with Elon here because um, I, you know, from what I know about, part of what I care about is, sort of like the long term health of humans, and the long term existence of our species. And there's really good evidence, and I'm sure you know about it, that we're just running huge existential risks at all times, um, uh, for us to self terminate. So when Elon talks about there being a narrow window to actually get to Mars and make us multiplanetary, um, I think this is like, well, one, I totally agree. Um, and two, I think it creates the kind of necessary urgency to bundle resources as much as possible and get us up there as fast as possible. I was listening to a podcast recently with someone at the University of Oxford, and they were talking about the fact that we have a 1 in 6 chance of self-terminating every century. And really, like, those are not a, those are not great odds. Those are not great odds if you're talking about humanity. So we should, you know, part of why, like, I think the biggest part of why space exploration is necessary is because it's a hedge against self-termination. Um, so, like, that's why I love Elon's urgency here.
Yeah, and I think the biggest problem we have with people embracing space is simply a believability problem.
Hmm.
I I think the vast majority of people, they're not interested, don't care about it,
Yeah,
things a waste of time because they think it's impossible.
yeah,
So I think the moment you're able to create like a flourishing settlement of any size on
yeah,
any place off of Earth, you really challenge that belief. And
yeah.
then I think that would be like the spark that would allow for other things to happen.
Absolutely, absolutely, and hopefully, I mean, the lunar landing can be a first step in that direction again, um, where people realize that this is possible. I mean, we have this window now, and we have to take advantage of it because we don't know how long that window is going to be open. Um, so it's just incredibly necessary to take advantage of it now. Yeah,
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at what we've done so far, we've only been able to collect maybe a few tons of material from off the world, and we haven't done anything productive with it, right? I mean, uh, what you need is that settlement on the moon, that thing that lands on the moon, collects the material, refines it,
yeah,
builds something useful out of it,
yeah,
and then you're able to start kind of making stuff happen.
yeah, yeah. I'm curious about that. Do you think that that's necessary just to justify the scientific effort, or as a means to galvanize people and get them excited?
Well, it's kind of funny about justifying the scientific effort. It's like when you have scientific developments that improve society, people are like, okay, that's great. Now we can do other things. It's not like, oh, that improves society. Let's invest more in science.
Yeah,
That's not generally the reaction of people.
right, right.
Um, so I mean, like electromagnetism was discovered by an astronomer, and a few hundred years ago.
Yeah,
And can you imagine not being able to receive and transmit radio waves,
right,
and
right,
how our
right.
society would look so different?
Totally, totally. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think there's bits like that in the space exploration program in the 50s and 60s as well, of course, uh, where the process of getting us to the moon yielded incredible scientific results. But I mean, I still agree with you, and that there's still so much more to know, of course, if we spent more time on the moon and more time on Mars, for sure.
I think one reason we haven't quite gotten the scientific discoveries out of our space program that we would hope, is that we don't send the curious observer uh, to those places. We
Yeah, yeah,
send essentially highly trained technicians that have
yeah,
blinders on to do
yeah,
to act like robots, as
yeah.
opposed to sending a scientist going, that's interesting. I wonder if this happens. And you have like this really quick loop of kind of one question leading to another question. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's really, that's a really fascinating point. I actually haven't thought about that yet. But you're totally right. I mean, we obviously conceive of what we are hoping to find out on these surfaces before we are on the surfaces. I mean, we take very specific experiments with us to Mars and to the moon, where we take instruments with us that can do very narrow and very specific things that we think could be useful, but um, that obviously narrows down all the things that we could possibly find out. So I totally agree with you. Um, if there was something or someone up there who, I guess, more objectively and more comprehensively looked at the environment, that could yield more interesting results. I agree. I mean, that's why we need a city up there, right? That's what
right.
we, you're totally right.
uh, peop a variety of people with free time.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah. And also, I mean, the other thing is we haven't made it out very far yet. I mean, we're just barely made it to moon, and now we're just barely starting to bring people to Mars in the next few years. So um, it's also a matter of just we're just really we're dipping our toes in space, if at all. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of a challenge. The first sort of settlements on in North America, they didn't really do so well, right? I mean,
Yeah.
our chances of having a first settlement actually survive and flourish,
Yeah.
I mean, I think those odds are way worse than 1 in 6.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, and I mean those initial settlements in North America. I mean, they took a long time to actually become sustainable on their own. I totally agree. This is a daunting task for sure. Um, what do you here's one question I'm curious about. How do you assess the increasing competition about colonizing Mars? So the obviously China just shot I think a rover up, and obviously we're doing the same, and Russia and Europe are too. So how do you assess that sort of increasing competition going up?
I mean, it looks great. I mean, China is trying to match everything that the US did
Yeah,
1 for 1 or and then do better.
yeah,
So I mean, maybe that's enough to wake us up. But
yeah.
I think our biggest challenge with colonizing Mars is, and even the moon, is this whole concept of planetary protection.
Hmm. Hmm.
It seems like that is more of a barrier than, I mean, it's almost like in some ways, if China could go out there and spoil the environment and then we come in behind them, that might be an easier way to go than,
Right. By planetary protection, you mean the notion that we should keep where we're going sort of like unspoiled? Is that what you mean?
exactly.
Okay. Interesting. Um, yeah, I mean, what do you think? What like? I mean, how do you assess the situation here? I mean, do you think that that is a serious risk? Um,
Of us spoiling the environment?
yeah, I guess. Yeah, or is that sort of like going about this process uncooperatively also, and changing the environment and the new planets that we go to.
I mean, um, my thoughts is yes, we'll change the environment, and it's a good thing, and we should do it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, sure.
I'm kind of on the wrong side of that. I mean, that's one of the challenging parts of these interviews. I've talked to people that are like, we spoil the Earth. Why would we spoil the moon too? And I've
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've had a little trouble sort of relating to that sentiment,
Yeah.
and I've been trying to like take a step back and see it from their perspective, and it's a real challenge for me.
Yeah, no, I think this is a really fascinating dynamic in these conversations where a lot of norms that we hold dear in our culture on Earth obviously don't apply or like apply in reverse in space. So I totally, I mean the notion that we should change these landscapes as soon as possible to make them as hospitable for us as possible. Obviously, it doesn't resonate with people on Earth, or doesn't apply to our current situation on Earth as much as it does elsewhere in space. Similarly, the notion of simply colonizing a new space obviously has negative connotations in our cultural discourse today as well, even though it is so necessary for us as a civilization to do. Um, so yeah, I mean, how have you navigated some of these dynamics? And you said you were trying to sort of be empathetic and look and try to look at it from other people's perspective. But how have you effectively done that?
Um, well, I mean, one is try to get them to talk a little bit more about what's driving that. The same people that don't want us to spoil the moon are quite happy to buy, some forest, tear down all the trees, and build a shopping mall. So,
Yeah,
kind of like what makes the moon special, and why are
totally.
we trying to keep that pristine? But also I think there's some usefulness from maybe not that perspective in its totality, but we don't know what we don't know about the moon. And as we do things, um, we'll learn more and become aware of more. And we may actually end up destroying some of the resources we hope to get. Like, for example, in the process of trying to explore some of these permanently shadowed craters, um, would it be conceivable that our activities could start like a chain reaction that could cause, them to disappear, and also there may be water ice there, but there also may be really complex organics that
Yeah,
have been preserved from millions of years, billions of years in
yeah,
Earth's past that may be really fascinating to examine. So in the process
yeah,
of trying to get breathable air and water for astronauts and rocket fuel,
yeah,
it would be good to at least assess on, is there something even more valuable
yeah,
in there than what we appear. So
yeah,
that's kind of where I see the growth opportunity from their perspective, at least.
yeah, yeah. And so like, exercising caution is a great principle to adhere to, and that's certainly something that we can take with us from the Earth when we go to these new places. So I agree with that.
But the thing is, time is the most limited resource, right?
Yeah,
We have a narrow opportunity, so we feel we definitely have a limited lifespan,
yeah,
and we definitely have an even shorter attention span.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, so in our process of trying to be, like, we have to take some risk. I mean, I feel like a little bit of recklessness is useful.
yeah.
Um, now,
Yeah, like aiming. I mean, like I guess aiming high. Like like we should really aim high with this. I agree with that. I like Elon Musk has talked about dropping nuclear bombs on the Mars poles and stuff like that. Like it's very interesting, and might be worth taking the risk, but sort of like we also don't want to like recklessly spoil the opportunities that we do have, I suppose. That's what I mean by being cautious.
I did
Yeah.
want to ask you about time, though. I know we're at the top of the hour. Did you have a hard stop?
Not entirely hard. I am at work, so I should probably wrap up relatively soon. But I'm really enjoying this, so we can keep going for a bit.
Um, so, Jeff Bezos's vision is not actually planets, but developing in space structures,
Yep.
and his argument is, we can make them to our liking, we can put them where we want, um, you know, um, we can move them around, all this good stuff, and
Yeah.
you know, um, I mean that's kind of a compelling vision too. It just doesn't appear that he has the same urgency. Like um, his plan, like he's trying to put in the foundation for something that'll happen, 500, 1,000 years from now, as opposed to something
Yeah.
that happens his lifetime.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I mean, I I think his efforts are definitely sincere. And but I think you know they 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 really, I think, miss kind of the urgency that we're like. I think that is necessary to frame this conversation and frame this whole effort in. And it's really about making us resilient, like immediately. Um, and so I think that his efforts there are certainly sincere, but they just, I think it's just sort of the wrong lens to look at this problem through. If we think that this is something in the distant future that is going to make us sort of like multiplanetary and resilient um, in the in the long term, where we really need that resilience very immediately, I think. I don't know if that's really what you're trying to get at, but I guess that's how I look at it. I'm also not. I mean, I'm much less familiar with Jeff Bezos' efforts, I guess, but I'd love to learn more about them.
Yeah, we all would. Blue Origin is not the most forthcoming or open organization, but
Yeah,
it looks like they're doing a lot. We had a person from our North Houston Space Society chapter get a job with them.
yeah,
Of course, there's nothing that you can share with us, but I mean, they're hiring. Like
yeah,
they're
yeah,
definitely building up a capacity, and
yeah,
um, it's just I mean, I would love for like the new Shepherd to start taking tourists up every day. That would
yeah.
be
No, totally. I mean, I think that would be a really good thing, for sure. Yeah.
yeah. Well, if it was safe and affordable, would you go to space?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. In a heartbeat. Yeah. I'd love to do that. Uh, I would be so excited and so curious. Both just like, I would do um, an orbital flight. I would like go to the moon. I go to Mars. I go somewhere else too. I'd do it all for sure.
That would be awesome. How affordable would it have to be? Like for a year's worth of salary, what would you expect?
As a percentage of a year's worth of salary, you mean?
Yeah,
Um, Well, I mean, it depends on the exact offering, of course. If I had a one-way ticket to like a colony on Mars, I'd have to assess, how exciting it is up there by the time I'd get there. But I'd even consider something like that. Uh, but for a space flight, I would probably, I mean, um, um, yeah, hard to say because I certainly hope that um, when it will be possible for me to do like a space flight, I hope that my income level is going to be different. Um, but I guess like I would probably at least spend at least half of my like annual income on a space flight for sure. But it could be much more still if it was a really exciting opportunity, I think. Um, so yeah, hard to say. I guess like my position is that I'm very willing, and I'm very willing to spend resources on it.
so for example, if you were making 500K right now, you would go on the 250K Virgin Galactic flight.
I think probably I would. Yeah, 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 for sure.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
Well,
for sure.
I really appreciate your time. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Oh well, there's so much more. But I think we covered a few of the bits that I care about very much, which is the sort of like political and cultural tension that we're in regards to like our short-term and long-term thinking. I'm really glad we touched on that. I guess one of the things that I'd just love to hear your thoughts on was what else is out there beyond the moon and Mars. Like let's imagine, this is 25, 50 years from now, and we have a colony on Mars and we have a colony on the moon. Where do we go next?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one thing is we've kind of given up on Venus. Should we have? I mean, it's hot, inhospitable. We put probes on there and they stop working within minutes.
Yeah,
Um, is there a way to maybe cool down that environment,
yeah,
reduce the pressure?
yeah,
Um, I mean, it, that could be an interesting experiment.
yeah,
Then the other thing is you have the asteroids,
yeah,
which materials to create these space structures. Perhaps we can build things within them, what have
mhm,
you. And then you have the moons of Saturn and Jupiter.
right, right,
Um, a lot of them are as big or bigger than our moon.
yeah,
And some of them have water, ice, and water, and some of them have methane and all
yeah,
sorts of stuff.
yeah,
Uh, so, so I mean, that could be really, really exciting. I mean, the thing is, you're looking at like 5 months to get to Mars. You're looking at probably like 5 years to get to Jupiter.
yeah, yeah,
So, and you probably don't want to be in a little bitty 7-person capsule
yeah.
to get there. You want to be in the huge cruise ship. You want to be in what like Avenue 5 or whatever. Whatever that uh, space comedy show on
Oh
Netflix
yeah,
is.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, we and I think we're making strides in that direction and just increasing size. Of course, that's just like so important. If just to build, colonies in the first place on the moon and Mars. But I agree, like we probably need bigger spaceships still if we want to make it even further out, of course. Um, so yeah, no, that's very exciting. I'm gonna look more into that as well. I have to learn more about sort of like what's beyond Moon and Mars. Yeah. Um, but yeah, but this
But
was really great.
I mean, you might see a big explosion of humanity all over the place. Once you
Hopefully,
show that you have a ship and you can make it to, I mean, it's just like the Pilgrims. They got together the money, got the ship,
yeah,
got it over here. I mean, what point do you start having like private groups get together and
yeah, yeah,
combine their resources? And the SpaceX Starship is like the covered wagon,
yeah,
carrying like groups of people who just want to go set up their own colony on their own terms, away
yeah.
from kind of like the risk, and like the risk of nature in those places may feel more manageable than the risk of their fellow person here on Earth.
Totally. Yeah. And it's fascinating, there was, before we transitioned into an agricultural economy and started to live in cities increasingly, there was all this diversity in, sort of like small human cultures that, were just a few hundred people, of course, and that were roaming around independently. And these, like, when you looked at humanity at that point, it was incredibly diverse culturally, and linguistically and politically also. um, and there's really been this process of homogenization, even as we increased our total number of members of our species. um, and it would be really fascinating, I think, to see that trend reverse again. And as smaller groups of people have the possibility to essentially set up shop on their own somewhere else independently, I think we would see like a flourishing of like cultural and political diversity again, which is a trend that's really quite the opposite, has been quite the opposite over the last few thousand years. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we almost need to be able to take everything we need to survive, put it into a cargo container, and be
Yeah,
able to put it someplace and have a flourishing
yeah,
settlement.
totally.
And we got to produce our food, our water, our air, our energy. So a lot more than we have before. But it seems like we could test that out here on Earth,
For
um,
sure. Yeah,
and you know, could be kind of good.
for sure. Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Nathan. This was really awesome.
But I appreciate your time. Well, you have a good rest of your day then.
Yeah, you too. Bye bye.
Bye bye.